On Thursday evening, November 10th, 1949, 16 people attended a meeting in the home of Mr. and Mrs. Billy Holder at 805 North 4th Street to discuss plans for organizing a Southern Baptist church in Garden City. Kansas State missionary Ray Hart of the Southern Baptist Convention helped run this meeting and led the group in prayer and Bible study from John 10. In its early years, the church was a mission of First Southern Baptist Church of Cunningham, Kansas. Following weeks and months, several would gather in homes to meet and pray for the plant of a Southern Baptist church in Garden City. For the next 2 years, Brother Ray Hart would serve as pastor of this small but hopeful church. On April 27, 1950, First Southern Baptist Church of Garden City was officially organized with 17 members. The church would have no official building for the next few years and would continue to meet in homes and basements until a building was built. In August of 1951, Reverend Reuben K. Yoder was called as pastor of this small congregation. Under his prayerful leadership, action would begin to take place in securing a loan from the Home Mission Board to purchase land to build a church building. In September of 1952, enough funds were secured to purchase a parsonage at 1414 North 3rd Street for the grand total of $10,400. The church would continue to meet here until a building was completed. Eventually, in 1953, lots were purchased for $3,000 that would become the future site of First Southern Baptist Church, Garden City, at 309 West Campbell. The work of a pastor in a church's infancy can be hard, and thus many pastors were called and resigned during the early years of the church. Reverend Yoder resigned in August of 1954. Reverend R.W. Campbell was the next pastor called, and he served until June of 1956. In October of 1956, Reverend K.W. Gaskin was called as pastor and served until May of 1960. In June of 1960, Reverend R.W. Stratton was called, and he would serve until April of 1961. In May of 1961, the church voted to accept a plan offered by the Kansas Convention of Southern Baptists, Home Mission Board, and Southern Plains Baptist Association for a missionary pastor. This would lead to the calling Reverend John Wade Lurtz as pastor in June of 1961. Even back in the early days of our church, there was a desire to plant more churches. In August of 1962, fellowship was extended to the 6th Avenue Baptist Mission in Dodge City, and for some time the church would give $25 a month to this mission. Then in September of 1963, the Deerfield Mission was planted. After the Dodge City Mission was constituted into a church a few years later, the decision was made to sponsor the Spanish Mission in Garden City. Reverend John Wade Lurtz resigned as pastor in December of 1964 to devote full-time to the area of missionary work. This would make way for Reverend Robert Chisnell to be called as pastor in May of 1965. As the church grew, the need arose for an expansion of the church building to include more Sunday school space for children and youth and a new sanctuary. This model and expansion would also include a new kitchen and additional classroom spaces for adults. The total cost of this project was $28,922, and the new sanctuary would be dedicated on June 23, 1968. Reverend Chisnall resigned in August of 1970, and the church called Reverend Del Sarat as pastor in January of 1971. Reverend Surratt would go on to work with Brother Lurtz to strengthen area pastors by teaching seminary courses through Hill City. Reverend Del Surratt would make the decision to resign in November of 1971, and the church called Reverend Hugh Jack Norwood as pastor in 1973. Reverend Norwood decided to resign in June of that same year to return to full-time evangelistic work. In September of 1973, Reverend Dwight L. Martin was called as pastor. Change and growth continued into the second 25 years of the church. In 1976, Reverend Martin resigned, and that same year, Reverend Doug Wooderson was called as pastor. Reverend Wooderson would serve until 1980 when he would put in his resignation. This would lead to the calling of Reverend Ernest Stewart as pastor. The church continued to grow, and the need for a new facility became clear. On February 28, 1982, the church broke ground at the current location of 2708 North 3rd in Garden City. 1 year later, the first service would be held in this building on March 3, 1983. In the spring of 1985, the church began a mission in Holcomb, Kansas, which would later become the First Baptist Church of Holcomb. 1987 saw the calling of Pastor Randy Cadell to First Southern Baptist Church. It was under his leadership that the church would expand and build the Community Life Center, also known as the CLC. The groundbreaking for this project happened on February 19, 1990. Together, our church members put in the effort to build something that is still well used today. In that same year, the church voted to begin the Vietnamese mission, and in the winter of 1991, the church voted to adopt Calvary Mission. With the new millennium, many changes also happened in the church. Randy Cadell stepped down in 2002 to begin his ministry with the Western Kansas Baptist Association. In the interim, we welcome Mike O'Donnell and Billy Chambers as interim pastors. In May of 2005, the church called Rick Durham as the pastor. In 2005, a remodel of the sanctuary happened, and we said goodbye to the orange pews. In 2014, Pastor Rick Durham stepped down, and after a few years of searching, we welcomed our current pastor, John Harms, in October of 2017. Under his leadership, we have seen significant growth and attendance and devotion to the Lord. As we face the challenges that COVID presented in 2020, we have improved our live stream capabilities so others can watch online. Our Wednesday night ministries have grown to serve and welcome the entire family with Venture Kids, Tiny Venture Kids, youth, and several adult class opportunities. In 2021, after 30 years of use, the CLC got some much-needed TLC, including a complete remodel of the kitchen. This has allowed us to utilize the space to continue to serve the church and the community, and it's one of the most used spaces in the church building. I don't think that when the church moved from Campbell Street to North 3rd that they would know that God would literally bring the nations to us. For 10 years, our Hispanic congregation has been meeting and worshiping the Lord with us. The International Church has been meeting for over 12 years, and the Haitian Church is thriving and growing in its 3rd year. Today, we celebrate God's faithfulness over the past 75 years. We look forward to what He'll do in the next 75. We pray that we will be a church of disciples, making disciples, and have the goal of planting 3 new churches in the next 5 years. We are currently in a capital campaign to raise funds for our new roof, doors, windows, and eventually more work to help us better utilize our space to continue to minister to everyone who walks in our front doors. We pray that we would be a church that continues to listen and seek the Lord, and that we would continue to follow Him for the next 75 years. For the Lord is good, His steadfast love endures forever, and His faithfulness to all generations. Psalm 100, verse 5.